Amanda, you've been involved in some retail work. I know you worked in the FTC on the Whole Foods FTC case. I'd love to learn a little bit about where we are right now with antitrust in retail. What are the kind of the key issues that you think are most important when evaluating retail mergers?
Sure. So market definition is probably first and foremost the most important issue when you're thinking about a retail merger. Despite the 2010 changes to the merger guidelines, market definition is still very important. And depending on the retail industry that you're talking about, most physical retail markets are going to be local. They're going to be fairly localized or regional markets as opposed to broader U.S., North America, or worldwide markets. And that makes sense because you have to think about where people physically buy stuff. You can only travel with a gallon of milk in your trunk for so long. So you're necessarily going to be shopping at a grocery store that's reasonably close to either where you work or where you live. And so market definition is always a key first issue to think about. And it's highly dependent on facts on the ground, especially for physical products that you're acquiring in stores. So you want to look at things like, what are the products being acquired here? How durable are they? So for example, if you buy a carton of ice cream in the summer, you're not going to travel 50 miles unless you've got a cooler in your trunk. Most people don't. You've got to look at, what are the reasonable travel paths that people are going to take to get to these locations? What are the traffic patterns? Are there loyalty programs or other things like that come into play? So all of these factors can affect the market definition analysis.
And that seems to deal a lot with the geographic market definition. But what about the product market definition?
Product market definition is very interesting, and there's been some recent focus, particularly within the FTC that handles most of the retail side mergers, looking at actual consumer spending patterns and looking at consumer behavior. So we've seen just in some recent non-public cases that I've worked on, the agencies have been looking for information about consumer surveys, asking for a lot of information about consumer survey data. And those surveys often go into potential competitive alternatives for customers. So that's been an emerging issue that we're seeing more of lately. We also see the agencies really focusing on the brown shoe reasonable interchangeability test and thinking about what are functional substitutes for consumers and how do consumers actually use the products. So there's been, certainly a lot of focus on that in determining product market issues.
But the product market discussion isn't solely based on the products. It's also based on the retail establishment themselves. For example, in 1997, the Staples FTC case, we saw that office superstores was a market definition, and that excluded other retailers that sold the same products. Why is this an important distinction?
Yeah, similarly in the FTC's case against Whole Foods and Wild Oats, you can buy a gallon of milk at Whole Foods, you can buy a gallon of milk at any conventional supermarket, but for some reason in that case, the market definition was limited to premium, natural, and organic supermarkets as opposed to broader supermarkets. Now, same in Staples Office Depot. In the case brought back in a dozen years ago or so. This is kind of going back to the point that I made earlier about consumer buying behavior and how that's important in an agency investigation into these types of mergers. The agencies really are focusing on what are practical substitutes for consumers, not just technical, functional substitutes. So, in Staples Office Depot, you can buy a pencil anywhere. You can buy a pencil probably at a gas station. You can buy a pencil at, Staples. You can buy a pencil at Walmart. You can buy the same exact pencil a lot of different places. But what they found in that case and what, the FTC also found in Whole Foods is that, there are certain types of customers that gravitate towards these certain types of retailers, and that can definitely be a factor in the market analysis.
Okay, and now what have we seen as a result? I think in December of 2012, the FTC conducted a study about retailer mergers. What was found out of that study?
Yeah, that was a really interesting merger retrospective. It was part of the FTC's broader merger retrospective project. This is one of the few that the FTC has done specifically relating to retail. This one looked back at supermarket deals that had been cleared, supermarket deals that had been challenged over several years. This was a Bureau of Economics working paper study done by Dan Hoskin and others. And in that paper, they were looking at whether a structural presumption actually proved helpful in retail type cases. And in the retrospective, they found that looking back, deals that they had cleared in markets with high concentration ratios actually did seem to suggest that there were higher prices resulting from those deals. And interestingly, deals where the markets were defined as either moderately concentrated or unconcentrated actually resulted in lower prices for consumers. So that tends to add some support to the use of structural presumptions in retail mergers.
Now, based on these market definition issues we were talking about, it seems that the purchasing experience plays a role in assessing the product market in retail mergers. With this in mind, what role does online purchasing play when we look at retail mergers?
Yeah, that's a very good question, and I'm not sure that there's been a lot of testing of that question so far. We haven't seen a lot of activity in the merger arena that have gotten full assessments by the agencies considering these questions. So internet retailing is really kind of the new horizon. There are, as a counselor for a party, if I were going into the FTC on any merger that could remotely involve a competing product coming out of an internet company, I would certainly try to argue that that's in the market. But I just don't know whether those arguments have been successful. I think those arguments are also going to be highly dependent on what products you're talking about here. So for example, if you're assessing competition in books, the argument that Amazon.com and other online retailers for books are strong competitors in that market are going to be much stronger than for products that are maybe less durable, groceries or other types of products that don't have such an online presence these days.
It would seem to me that with the Staples Office Depot merger, if Office Superstores excludes Kmart's, Walmart's, wouldn't it even further exclude the Amazons and the online purchasing entities that are out there?
Well, that's an interesting question, and I think with the recently announced Office Depot, Office Max merger, we'll get some hopefully helpful information on how the agencies would think about that. But unfortunately, that deal's still pending. So, I think it will be informative to see how the agencies assess that exact issue, now several years later after the Staples Office Depot deal was challenged.
I think it's great that you bring up the Office Depot Office Max merger. Now, is there anything that we can draw from the 2012 retrospective in the supermarkets that can help us inform as to what might be concerning the agencies this time around?
Well, I think that in the retrospective, particularly, it related to supermarkets. It was very specifically narrowed to supermarkets. But I think one thing that we can take away from that is that the structural presumptions and the structural analysis that the agencies do is not gone. Even though the 2010 merger guidelines have kind of suggested that market definition may not play as an important role in their analysis, they still look at that and it still matters. It's still part of the story that they have to tell. And so when merger retrospectives like the one that came out in December are announced and they show support for these structural presumptions, it just reemphasizes that you do have to go back and you have to do your market definition exercise and you have to figure out how to define that. But when you have a 4-3 or a 3-2, that's going to be an important factor.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, Amanda. We really enjoyed having you today.
Okay, it was my pleasure.